Yeah, Prophet Marshall Occurrence. So this video is gonna be straight to the point. It's gonna be about something very important that's been on my mind lately, and I just been kind of growing with this perspective for quite some time. Um, a spiritual awakening happened to the whole humanity of the world. This is what I personally believe. I mean, I guess in the beginning, I didn't see the whole full picture. I thought some people had a spiritual awakening, but what I believe is it was all of humanity. Now, can I explain how the whole community had this spiritual awakening? No, I cannot explain it. I cannot explain it intelligently and fully accurately, but I believe that it happened. I believe that it happened. I believe that there's been a spiritual awakening with all of humanity, the whole world, spiritually. And the telltale signs of it is that, like I explained before, you got mind readers, you got people that can hear thoughts, and you're a Christian. So then you've been struggling with how can you hear thoughts? How can you be a psychic or a telepath and you're a Christian? And so what a lot of Christians have done that have had that spiritual awakening, you kind of pushed away from Christianity because you became more spiritual. You had a spiritual awakening. And so you don't even gravitate towards church people no more. You don't even deal with church people, Christian church people. I say that respectfully, man. When this spiritual awakening happened, a lot of people just moved away from the church because they wasn't touching on the same things that we was going through. They wasn't touching on this spiritual awakening. They didn't have messages that was progressive of the spiritual awakening. It's an elephant in the room. Everybody has had this spiritual awakening, but you would not find a everyday religious Christian that's able to talk about it intelligently. You know what I'm saying? So that's why I wanted to go ahead and put this out here, because I feel like this is unique, original, intellectual property that we as humanity had a spiritual awakening. We all did. To where now this spiritual awakening is defined by heightened intuition, heightened awareness, heightened synchronicity, where you see numbers everywhere. You see the same numbers, 555 on the clock, 333. That's synchronicity. If you look at some of my pages, you go through, I got like 5 pages, you'll see my messages on synchronicity. I can't get into it. Anytime I talk about it, I like to address it, but I can't really do it on every message. You know, as a teacher, as a prophet teacher, I can't go into every subject and then make a whole message on everything I talk about. But if you want to know about synchronicity, just go through my pages. I got like 5 pages. Go through the pages with the most subscribers, because that's the pages that probably have the messages on synchronicity. Okay, but synchronicity in essence is basically when you have perfect timing. You walk outside, this happens. You walk outside, a person turns a corner in perfect timing. It's like this perfect timing alignment. That's the best way to describe it. It's perfect timing alignment. And many of you have been experiencing that for like well over about 10 years. This perfect timing alignment. Like, you go outside, you do whatever you do. Some of you, even when you drink or smoke weed, you get into this matrix of synchronicity where you got perfect timing. You get this vibe where everything is lining up and it's really cool to you. And you notice it more when you're intoxicated, right? And you notice that all of this is happening. This becomes this cool synchronicity kind of matrix for yourself, good matrix, where people see you lining up in this perfect timing. in this synchronicity. It's kind of like dancing. You know, you dancing in this perfect timing alignment in front of the community and as you interact with the community. And many of you have been going through that for like well over 10 years or so. And but I would say the officially, I think this spiritual awakening probably started around 2017. That's about the time it started. And many of you, which is going on 10 years, back to 10 years, many of you started hearing the voices of other people without trying to read their minds, without trying to talk to them, without trying to be a psychic or a telepath or something like that. You just got the thoughts. They came to you. And for me, that started around 2017. That started around 2017 for me, where I just started. Like for me, it was like traffic. I could hear the thoughts of people as traffic rolled by. I could hear the thoughts of traffic. And I just kind of knew it was spiritual. And I just kind of kept it to myself. But I knew it wasn't something I could dismiss. I knew it was something I couldn't dismiss, right? I knew it was something I couldn't dismiss. So I just kind of, I didn't suppress it. I just kind of internalized it, I guess you could say. And as time went by, there was an antagonist to my spiritual awakening. And that's what many of you are dealing with. If you're Christians and on the good side of spirituality, you first had a spiritual awakening, and then right after that, you got antagonists and nemesis to oppose you in your spiritual awakening that started reading your mind. Because how it happened for me is I started reading minds first, or knowing the thoughts of others first. That came first, and then people reading my thoughts came after that, which was the nemesis and the antagonists that would oppose me, the ops. The ops came after I had a spiritual awakening. See, for many of you that are high ranking, that's how it happened to you. And maybe it was because they seen your high rank. And when you had your spiritual awakening, right after that, you had the spiritual ops come in and start playing around your mind. As far as hearing the ops and the thoughts of others, the enemies in the spiritual world, that started around 2018, around May, June 2018. For me, that's when it started happening. About June 2018. You know, in over 8 years. And they play a position that I think has been in place for some time. It wasn't really that they had a spiritual awakening. It really was us. These psychics and telepaths was kind of already in position. But all of humanity got a spiritual awakening. How you know? You can tell how the whole community moves now. You can see this whole spirituality on the whole community. This is how you know the whole community had a spiritual awakening, because when you go outside, it's everybody is lined up with this spiritual alignment, if you will, that either is good spiritual alignment or evil spiritual alignment, where they oppose you with their spirituality, reading your mind, trying to trigger you and everything. See, it's two sides of this spiritual awakening. Like I said, I think there was some psychics and telepaths already playing their position, and but I leave room for those who had a spiritual awakening, but they decided, because they was already corrupt when they had it, they decided to oppose us. There were spirits and other spirits in place to give them a position or information on the position to oppose those who are good and positive with this spiritual awakening. But I think we all had it. I think in my greatest foundational reason for believing that is how the whole community moves in spirituality, whether it's good or evil. You can see it both, and I think that's basically this spiritual awakening. Probably was the final wars of good between good and evil. So basically, this spiritual awakening that started around 2017 was because of the final wars. It was gathering souls on both sides, and we had a spiritual awakening. You had it, I had it, and it's not. And the main reason it probably happened was because we were gathered to war. That's why many of you who are the spiritual warfare elite, like me, you're in position of war. You're not in position of church and all of that, banging tambourines. You know, you're not in the position of banging tambourines because this spiritual awakening was in the first place to gather us to war. So the 2017 spiritual awakening, even though we didn't know, it really was to gather us to war. That's what it was about. That's what it was all about. But it took us time to progress with our spiritual awakening to realize that position. And some people, even though they had a positive spiritual awakening, they went back into religion. They went back into these more tangibly religious mindsets, and they suffocated their spiritual awakening. That's what happened. And some of us just stay free and wild, and that's why your spiritual awakening is still good and robust and free and wild, like mine. You know, my spiritual awakening is free and wild. You know, I didn't bring in any religious additives to my spiritual awakening. I am a Christian, definitely. I believe in Jesus. I believe he came to the earth. I believe he rose from the dead in 3 days, and he sits on the right hand of the Father. I'm filled with the Holy Ghost, with the evidence of speaking in tongues. I believe in Yahweh as the Father. I believe in the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. But I think the main thing and how I need to say it is that many American Christians in church did not have a spiritual awakening. And the reason why they didn't have the spiritual awakening the time that we did around 2017 was because they were too deep in religion for it to happen. The religious people did not have the spiritual awakening. As a matter of fact, the closest they get to this spiritual awakening as religious people is being used by the ops. The religious people are used by the ops. You see what happened? You see how this is all going into the scriptures, because in the last days it says that there will be a great falling away from the faith, meaning in the last days there's going to be many Christians that fall away from the faith. And I think one of the main reasons is it's not just sin, it's religion. And so when we had this spiritual awakening and they was religious, the satanic kingdom could easily manipulate them and utilize them to oppose us as people that had a robust, healthy, divine spiritual awakening. And many of you are struggling to, how do I put this, fit into the everyday Christian format that you once fat in before this spiritual awakening. You're still trying to check for certain gospel artists and certain preachers, but you know that you had a spiritual awakening. So it's like when you visit that, it's not really on your level. You see what I mean, right? It's not really on your level. And some people became rebellious. Some people turned away. Some people might have even had a spiritual awakening and just decided to turn away from Christianity. The devil is crafty. His kingdom is crafty. And even though you had a divine spiritual awakening, how you perceived it was, I don't need to be dealing with the Christians no more. I don't need to deal with no Christian. I need to go over there where real spirituality is, because where you got the psychics, the witches, the warlocks, the telepaths, they make it look like, yeah, we are aware of spirituality. We got spirituality over here. So many Christians, I think, with the great falling away that it talks about in the Bible, I think many, when they had a spiritual awakening, decided to, because they didn't see it in Christianity, they didn't see it in the church, they decided to go over to divination, witchcraft, telepathy, psychic energy, new age movement, all that kind of stuff. But some of y'all held God down, meaning you stayed loyal to God. Like I held God down. I stayed loyal to God. You know, even though I felt this yearning to know more about progressing spiritually as a person. You know, I found out information, but I held God down. You know what I'm saying? I didn't go into full blown divination, witchcraft, telepathy, and everything like that. But you can't go back. You can't go back to how it was. We can't go back to how it was in like 2006, 2007. That type of Christianity where we were going to all these conferences, the Mega Fest conferences with T.D. Jakes, Juanita Bynum, all these different, Paula White, you know, all them different type of people, Creflo Dollar. We had many of us that especially are fasting, that fast all the time. Many of you that give offerings, and you've given offerings all your life from your early years of Christianity. You had a spiritual awakening based off your spiritual rank, based off your works. You had spiritual reciprocity that came back to you, so that when this final war broke out, glory to God, God pulled you in position and elevated you, and you start hearing the voices of people around you. You start hearing stuff because you played a position that produced fruit as far as spiritual works, and you, in return, God gave you a harvest of a spiritual awakening to make you aware in this spiritual war, because you have to be. When we have to, hear me closely, when we have to face these witches and warlocks and psychics and divination people, you had, as God's people, you had to have a spiritual awakening to be aware of what they're doing. But you trying to suppress it, you can't suppress it. It is what it is. You just got to understand that your gifts don't mean you have to go over there with the divination community. That's how the devil gonna come to you. You're too spiritual to be over there with the Christians. That's how his kingdom gonna come. You're too spiritual to be over there with that religious community. You outrank that. And that's how many of you feel. Because it's true. You do outrank them, but you gotta be loyal to God. You gotta be loyal to God because He gave you that spiritual awakening for you to be aware of your enemies as we progress in this final spiritual war. You see why it happened to us? Because you had to be aware. You couldn't just, you see what I'm talking about? God had to make you, He had to add to your spiritual design to where you could hear what's going on around you, because it was on that level of conspiracy and things and the gang stalking and everything that happened. God knew what all was going to happen before this stuff happened. And He started to prepare His people to be able to hear, to be able to see spiritually on a whole nother level. It was a spiritual awakening. And it started around, for me, and I think nationwide and worldwide, it started around about 2017. And most of you will confirm that. Most of you will confirm I started having this genuine spiritual awakening, a personal spiritual awakening around about 2017. But you didn't know because we don't have many leaders here in America. At least I'm just speaking for my country, this country. You didn't have many leaders to cultivate your spiritual awakening. Look up the word cultivate. You didn't have many spiritual leaders to cultivate your spiritual awakening. So the devil came in and knew you didn't have nobody to cultivate it, and you really didn't know how it was because you was trained by religious people, American Christians. So he knew he can get you to say, I'm spiritual. Now, what do I do next? Do I go over here where people understand what I've went through? And many of you, like me, I've searched the internet for the spiritual things I experienced. And the truth is, you find people that are more outside of Christianity that actually understands your spiritual awakening. And I've done that as a Christian. Many of you have looked up stuff about spiritual experiences on the internet, on YouTube, and you found people outside of Christianity that understood what you was experiencing. For high-ranking people, you probably been on the internet looking up all this different stuff you experienced to try to see if you could find someone else that understood what it was and trying to get some understanding yourself. And those people that you found were outside of Christianity more than not. More than not, they were. Because they think, many religious people here in America think that when you start talking about stuff along the lines of spirituality, now you're talking about divination, now you talk about, witchcraft. You're talking about something outside of God's kingdom. No, you're not. You look in the Bible, it's so much spirituality in there. It's totally spiritual. You got to remember, God is totally spiritual. Jesus was totally spiritual. The Holy Ghost is totally spiritual. You just been taught to stay within some type of religious format in America, where you got two types of Christians: those who follow a spiritual format, especially after their spiritual awakening, and those who follow religious traditional formats, and they suffocate their spiritual awakening. And right now is not the time to do it, because we're in the final wars between good and evil. And so people over there that suffocate their spiritual awakening because you try to put your spiritual awakening within the formats of traditional Christianity in America, it didn't work. You getting your head tore off in spiritual war, because it's not just the spiritual part or aspect of it. It's also the informational part. You're not being given the right information of what to do in this gathering of war between good and evil. This is why I teach people, according to my spiritual awakening, in this gathering of war against good and evil, to we have to now use our spiritual weapons against these telepaths, psychics, you see what I'm saying? These witchcraft people. Because that was the gathering of the final war. They didn't know it. They didn't know what they was doing. They goofy, corny people. They didn't know really what they was doing. So they was utilized by the satanic kingdom. That's how you got to look at it. Instead of paying attention to how lame they are as a community, look at it from how Satan is looking at it in his kingdom. All he wanted to do is just use these people against us, to stand in our way, to attack us. You see what I'm saying? Even though it's corny, but it's still being done. You feel me? Okay, so, you can't afford to play with this in a religious format. You have to have teachers that have had this spiritual awakening, that are Christians. They're Christians indeed. Nothing else. Just 100% Christian. But you had a spiritual awakening that's able to tell you that things that we didn't think was going to happen, these surprise things that we didn't think was going to happen, it is here. I never would have thought that we would be in a spiritual war against America. I wouldn't have never thought this. in the million, not like it is with the gang stalk and all these people around. But here we are. You know what I'm gonna do? Wish it away, try to make it something else according to a religious format, according to Christianity from the past, and try to make it seem like we need to love on these people and all. Nah, this is a gathering. This spiritual awakening was about a gathering, a spiritual gathering of the final wars between good and evil. And that's why you know it ain't gonna stop. How you know, listen, how you know the gang stalking is not gonna stop is because it's within its purpose by Satan is to fight us in these final wars. Does that make sense? And it's not gonna go away. It's not gonna go away. This is why I try to teach people to be heavy-handed. Come in, fasting, giving offerings, using your spiritual weapons against this surprise that we did not know was going to happen, this spiritual attack that we did not know was going to happen, this surprise attack where we're in this reality, whether we like it or not. That's what makes us soldiers. We able to adjust very quickly. Once I seen what I was going through, started like after the spiritual awakening I had, after by 2019, I had ops against my spiritual awakening. And I had no force but to go into war. It was innocent from the very beginning. It wasn't out of hate. It's when I seen the gang stalkers following me from Florida to Georgia to California, I knew I had no choice but to fast against these Americans. That's how it happened for me. Early 2019 is when I started. It was basically out of total innocence of defending myself spiritually. When I seen all these people playing with me and playing in my face. And many of you, it happened for you just the same way. But what I'm trying to show you as a sensei, as a spiritual sensei, how you have to do it is you have to turn your weapons. Like, you know how nuclear bombs can turn, like, and it can point towards whatever direction they want to send those weapons to moving forward, right? You have to now turn your spiritual nuclear weapons of fasting and giving offerings towards these gang stalkers, towards these Americans. And if you're in another country, towards the gang stalkers, towards all the people in your community that's working with the gang stalkers. You got to turn your spiritual weapons towards them and start using them. And that's what you're not going to be taught by religious people. And see, that's the progression of this situation. Mind you, it's all about a spiritual war anyway. It's all about a spiritual war anyway. So then there's going to be senseis that's going to talk progressively about your position in this war. And that's how you know who's in the spirit. That's why I don't really even listen to no traditional Christian people anymore, no, because they're not talking about this war, the gathering of good and evil. And when they get to heaven, they're going to understand, wow, we didn't even know. And we're going to get the most honor. We're going to get a lot of honor for playing our position when people thought we was crazy. You know, when people thought we was tripping, when people thought we took it too far. In all actuality, it was the Americans. So when we get to heaven, we'll get double honor for playing our position, you know, and that's how you have to look at it. For Christians that are on their way to heaven, because there are religious people that I esteem that have a religious perspective. They're on their way to heaven, right? But we have to just, and when we explain this stuff and they think we're crazy or they think we're in error, we just got to walk away from that kind of mindset. We got to walk away from that way of thinking. Because we know we know what we know. You know, had a spiritual awakening. It's no denying it. if not for any other reason, you've had this spiritual awakening in your personal life, and it's no denying it. It's no denying it. Right? It's no denying it. And they're not relating to it. They're not even talking about that. So what you supposed to do? You have to. God is going to lead you to people like me and others. How you know I'm not a cult? Because I'm not the only person that I'm telling you to come to. It's going to be other people that's going to that's talking along these lines about these gang stalkers, about these people. That's the people that are gathered in this final war. That's them. That's us. It's us. So how you need to hear it is, we are God's people that have been in spiritual alignment properly, that did not deviate, and we progressed as God wanted us to progress. Not our will, but God's will be done. And we progressed to be gathered for this final war against good and evil. And so it's almost like like the Bible says, in the last days many shall fall away from the faith. It's like all of that is going on, and it's religious people going on over there, and we became these people that don't even look like Christians. Many people are even questioning whether you're a Christian. Many of you that are listening to me, you have had a spiritual awakening, and your conversation and information based on that spiritual awakening has people thinking you're into divination or witchcraft. But you're not. You're not, though. You are using your spiritual weapons. You're in this last war. So let's agree. There are last wars in this whole war between good and evil. Okay, so then what's going to be done? There's going to be a gathering. Hear me closely. There's going to be a gathering. God is going to send his angels to form a gathering where we fight against evil in these final wars, because Satan decided to fight us first. And so God began to awaken our ears. That's why you can hear. That's why you can see, because God wanted us to be protected. He wanted us not to be blind. So he awakened us. He awakened you because he didn't want you to be blind to your enemies, to your community, to the American community. So he had to awaken you on a whole nother level of spirituality, so that you could see when you go to all these stores and you go all these places, and everywhere you go, you ain't gonna be blind just thinking these people love you and like you and they cool, or they Americans and they cool. You had to be awakened. You see why, right? You see how it all lines up, what I'm talking about, and it makes perfect sense, right? That's all I'm saying. So do we have love? Yeah, we have love. I have love, but I'm in this final war. Like, I mean, you know, a real war. So I mean, it's like asking a soldier that's at war, do I got love? Yeah, I got love, but I'm in this final battle. I'm in these final battles, and we are gathered as God's people, and we're using our spiritual weapons as God wants us to. Yahweh wants us to use our spiritual weapons concerning these people, because they're engaged against us. You see what I'm saying? And it's not going away. It's not a street fight. It's a full gathering. It's not a street fight. You hear me? It's not a street fight. It's a gathering between good and evil that's not going to go away. You know, so like there will be some that don't play their position. There will be some that do never play their position, and God know where they at, and they gonna never play it. That's why you can't pay attention to that. You just gotta feel what you feel and know what you know, kind of situation spiritually, and know I'm not in error. I'm not in the wrong spirit. This is what it is. And you got to move with discretion about who you talk to about your spiritual awakening. I'm going to keep talking about this. Because this is a progressive campaign message. This is a message that won't stop. We're going to keep talking about because the progression of our spiritual awakening is not going to stop, and the progression of this spiritual war is not going to stop. So I'm going to keep progressing on this whole dynamic of our spiritual awakening for purposes of gathering in war against the evil. That's why it's everywhere. This is how you know it's a worldwide gathering of good and evil. This is how you know, because other people in other countries are complaining about being gang stalked. They all complaining about it. At first, I wasn't on that level. Like, I'm gonna tell you how I started with the gang stalking situation. Because I know who I am spiritually, right? I know who I am spiritually. I thought this was some situation with me, and then you got other situations, other, betrayals and different things. I thought that was along those lines, and that's just what it was. Personal betrayal in my life and different things going on around me, and my rank included, and people betraying me in my personal life and in my community and everything like that. And so I just thought it was just basically what I was going through personally. But then when I seen this, that's how I started, right? I knew my intuition was telling me something wasn't right. But then I started to realize when I looked online, people was having talked about monitoring spirits and flying monkeys and all of that stuff, being under surveillance out in public. And I was like, man, that's exactly what I'm going through. Before I even knew what the term gang stalking was, before I even knew what that term was, I was going through it, and I knew as soon as I heard it, I'm like, that's what I'm going through. The term itself, I knew from my experiences that that's what I was going through. I knew that's what I was going through. But then the next step was international. That's what bugged me out. Like, I'm like, really? In another country? I don't know. I was slightly skeptical. Like, this going on in another country? In other countries. They gang stalking in other countries. Because I thought it made sense according to American entertainment, the goofiness of America, these video games, this music, this culture, American culture. I'm thinking that's one of the reasons. Before I realized this was a gathering of war between good and evil, I'm thinking it was basically the culture. You see what I mean, right? So how could this be in another country when people don't really think like this? Because it was a gathering of good and evil. That's what it was. And that explains how we all had this spiritual awakening, because it was all of us being gathered in war against evil. It was the final wars between good and evil, and it happened worldwide. So that's why you will hear people complaining about gang stalking in other countries, because you see what I'm saying? It's the gathering of the war between good and evil. Everywhere, worldwide. It's worldwide. This war has escalated. The spiritual war has escalated between good and evil, and it's worldwide. It's spirits, ultimately, that's controlling this whole situation, and it's not gonna stop. That's why I want you to come to terms with. Be strong and realize it's not gonna stop. Just don't even think about that. Now, can you have peace? Can you get blessings? Can you meet your a companion? Can you find somebody that loves you? You can find all of that going through this, but you're still in a spiritual war. You still have had a spiritual awakening, and God will send you a person that helps you navigate, that will navigate with you through the gang stalker. You got to be with somebody that understands it. And God, even if they don't know the terms and everything, and you may be more aware of what it is, God is going to send you this companion that gives you certain information where their resistance towards this gang stalking, resistance towards these certain type of people. They're going to have a strong suit of being resistant towards these gang stalkers and these people that's doing this stuff. They're going to have the goods, in other words, to be a soldier with you by your side against these gang stalkers. They're going to have the goods. You got to have a person. Listen, you that have had spiritual awakenings to be gathered in this final war between good and evil, you got to have a person that is not of this world, that is not of this culture, that understands, that are not of the worldly cultures of the world, that understand this gang stalking and these final wars between good and evil. You got to be with somebody like that. If not, I'm gonna tell you from my personal experiences, you know, this person is gonna be used against you as the equivalent of a blind witch. You can go Google a blind witch. A blind witch is basically someone who acts as a witch or a warlock without being one, but they have the same activity as one, to cause misfortune in your life, to attack your life, speak certain things over your life, etc., etc. That's a blind witch, right? So, if you get with a companion that don't understand the gang stalking and don't understand these final wars between good and evil, that person is going to be like a blind witch in your life, or a blind warlock in your life. God will, listen, as far as kingdom spouses goes, God will send God is going to send to you that have had spiritual awakenings the same type of person. Even if they, like I said, even if they're not on your level, right? You don't look, what you look for is the foundation of a spiritual awakening, and where their spirit is, you can see that it's prepared in spiritual war against evil. It's the telltale signs are there, how they talk, how they think, and their spirituality, right? And they're not religious where they think we don't have no battle, we don't have no fight. That's what you look for too. That they're not religious people that think we don't fight nobody. Because there's wars in the Bible, so sometimes things change and we have to go to war. And that's where we are. And God is going to lead you to somebody that will understand this. And like I said, they might not be on your level, but they're going to have a good foundation of understanding understanding the symptoms and the reality of gang stalking. And they're going to navigate just like me and you. They're going to be willing to navigate like me and you. That's what you're looking for. People that's a companion that's willing to navigate according to this information that we talk about. They ain't doubting it. They know that they feel this real. See, that's your companion. As soon as they start entertaining what you're saying and they believe it and they know that it is true, that's who God has led to you. They gonna understand this stuff. They might not know the terms, but they gonna understand, like how I started out, just with their intuition. They already knew something was going on. That's what you look for when, through their language, they verbalize intuitive understanding about this gang stalking and this spiritual war. That's what you look for in your kingdom spouse. In 2026 and moving forward, you look for someone who has intuitive understanding about intuitive information, and they verbalize intuitive information about this final gathering of wars between good and evil, and they give intuitive information and awareness and insight and understanding about gang stalking. That's what you look for. God gonna lead them type of people to you. That's the new season. But see, you got to come all the way out of the religious church and all of that. And see, that's why it's a lot going on right now, because it's a shifting. Where God's people like us, we got to be with somebody like that. We can't be with no religious person, no clean, just good church person. You can't do that. They're going to be used against you. They're going to be beaten and gang stalking. Think about it. You already know that. You're already aware. If you've been gang stalked for X amount of time, you're already aware if somebody comes into your life and don't know what this is, how they going to handle it? That's what you're already thinking about. So God going to lead you to the right people, man, as far as your kingdom spouse that understands this. You know what I'm saying? That already got a foundation, that is ready to be in position in spiritual warfare against this evil. God gonna lead you to that right person. Okay, so for God's true people, salute. Over and out.